Freemasonry is often described as a journey toward enlightenment. How did your own journey begin, and how has it shaped your worldview?
My journey had kind of a twofold beginning. It had a little bit of a false start, and then later on, I wound up diving in, and I will explain. Um, Earlier on, when I was kind of high school aged, I discovered that my grandfather was a member of the Freemasons, and this is where I grew up in New York City. And I discussed it with him briefly. I said, look, I understand there's some things that you're probably not allowed to divulge. I understand that reputation of Freemasonry. But to the extent that you are able to talk about it, I'm interested in it. I'd like to know more. What can we discuss? And he said, fundamentally, Freemasonry is a fraternity. You're about to go away to college. Why don't you go see and experience what fraternities are like? And then if it interests you, we can discuss it some more. And I think when he said that, he didn't realize how much fraternities on the American college campus had changed in the 60 or so years since he had been in school.
Sure.
So I came here to Pittsburgh to attend college, went to some fraternity social functions, had a pretty fun time, but I looked at it and I was like, well, I don't entirely see how this is something I would want to pursue the rest of my life. So never really ended up having those follow-up conversations with my grandfather on this subject. And you fast forward, good heavens, about a decade. I'm still living in Pittsburgh. I had started to put down roots. And I was living in a particular neighborhood of Pittsburgh, the South Side, where there's a lot of nightlife, there's a lot of clubs, and a lot of rock concerts. I had a friend who owned a business, and it's a delicatessen. So being in this neighborhood, there were always all of these printed flyers hanging in the window, advertising events. And usually rock concerts. Come see this band at this venue, and so on and so on. But one day I'm walking past his deli, and there's this flyer hanging in the window, and it says, "Come out for this hangout, this social gathering. We're going to have hoagies, submarine sandwiches. We're going to watch the Pro Bowl football game. We're going to shoot pool." And sponsored by, and I see a bunch of different, what I recognize as Masonic logos underneath. And I was like, well, that's different. And I walk into the deli and I find my friend Eric, who owned the place. And I asked him what the deal was with this flyer. And he said, oh, he lit up. He's like, I'm so glad you asked. I've been a member of the Freemasons for about 5 years now. It's something I care about a lot and I'm interested in. So I'm helping them throw this social. And it's partly for the existing members to just hang out and enjoy each other's company, but also for people who might be curious about the fraternity to come out and see it and experience what this social organization is like. And I relayed to my friend Eric that I had had this interaction with my grandfather, but I felt like something had gotten lost in translation. And he said, why don't you come out and meet the guys and see what it's like and decide whether it's something that you're interested in. If it is, we can discuss that some more. And I wasn't really sure at all what to expect going into it. But when I got there, I discovered it was just a bunch of really nice people, like fundamentally good guys. But the interesting thing was there was a certain amount of diversity in that room. There were guys who were college professors or, like worked in offices or wrote computer code, and there were also guys who like repaired appliances and worked on utility lines. And I was like, oh, it's a lot of different people who might not otherwise cross paths, but what they have in common is caring about like being genuinely decent, respectable people. So I came back to my buddy and I was like, yeah, this is absolutely something I'd be interested in. And I kind of dove in head first, and I've been very active ever since. That's back in 2006, which means it's been 19 years, which kind of blows my mind sometimes.
Yeah, there's so many ways to go from that. But initially, when you were going to dip your feet into Freemasonry and explore this, was there any hesitancy or fright about what this could be?
Yes, there was, because Freemasonry is surrounded by a lot of myth and lore, right? And I think that the general impression that it's left on the public is that there's something spooky or frightening about it. And I understand that, and I recognize it because I know that the boat that I was in before I joined, I knew that reputation too. Um, and it just crossed my mind. I was like, my grandfather, who I admired and respected so much, was there. There's a lot that I loved about him, but he was not a brave man. He was like more of a meek, mild kind of guy. And so I recognized, I was like, well, if it's something that he was capable of getting engaged and getting involved in, maybe there isn't that much to be scared of. That, and also, honestly, one of the interesting things about my buddy Eric, this fellow who owned that delicatessen, who brought me in, um, he had gathered a lot of printed material, particularly magazines that are put out by some of these Masonic branch organizations. They have publications talking about what activities they're engaged in, what kind of fundraising they're doing for what sort of charitable efforts. And he said to me, if you want to know more, here, you can read this. So I had some exposure, some understanding, I felt like, of what they were doing, what they were engaged in, what was going on. That certainly put my mind at ease too.
Can we talk about some of those misconceptions about Freemasonry?
Absolutely.
You know, as soon as I encountered it, I was encountering it in a parallel way of like the Illuminati. And I apologize for this kind of Joe Rogan tangent, but these are very different things.
Yeah. Um, there was historically an organization that existed called the Illuminati. Particularly the like historical version that I know to have been documented that existed was the Bavarian Illuminati. Um, they don't exist anymore. Uh, at one time, because they were interested in wielding more influence, more like not to be grandiose, but like more power and influence, if you will. They also wanted to infiltrate and manipulate the Masons themselves, and they failed. And the organization doesn't exist anymore. Now, much like with some other organizations and their names, right? That doesn't mean that there aren't now newer, more recent vintage organizations that have adopted that name in order to take on that mantle and that air of mystery and maybe superiority. But the authentic original doesn't exist anymore. Conspiracy theories often arise because people find it convenient to blame um, mysterious outside overarching forces for challenging or inexplicable happenings, either in world history or in their own personal lives. This particular organization, the Illuminati, does not exist anymore. Another place you'll hear it very commonly referenced, unfortunately, is by scammers
Hmm.
who want to persuade some individual that they will reap material wealth and benefit if they join the Illuminati. So they will reach out to a susceptible individual who has expressed some interest in joining an organization in order to advance their self-interest, and they'll say, "Hey, you can have membership in this organization, the Illuminati, if you only send me your membership fee." And unfortunately, these poor susceptible individuals end up getting bilked and swindled out of their money. Uh, and that's unfortunately, that's part of what's keeping that name alive. It's circulating out there because it's still being used by many different parties, some of whom are frauds and scammers.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. I just want to backtrack to something that you said, which is our kind of tendency to blame whatever's going on in the world on these small, secretive groups. This question is just for me, but why do you think that is? Whatever's going on in the world, it doesn't really make sense. It's incredibly complex, a lot of moving parts, and so we just denote everything to, oh, it's the Freemasons, it's the Illuminati, secret cabal of intelligent people.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to give too much credit to people who accept and or perpetuate misinformation, but I do want to say I can sympathize with the desire to know. Like, people want to fill in the blanks. When you're struggling with challenging circumstances and you want to understand, why do I feel like the world is always raining on my parade? Um, I think if you'll pardon me using this terminology, the Freemasons are particularly vulnerable to getting used as a scapegoat in those situations,
Hmm.
in part because we have secrecy. So if you're part of the general public and you genuinely don't know what we're doing behind closed doors, you're going to be inclined to make up the answer. And so, like, I don't appreciate or respect the fact that people are making up those answers, but I sympathize. I understand the tendency to say, well, I know that once a month this parking lot fills up with cars, and a bunch of guys in suits and ties who are smoking cigars walk into the building, and then they lock the door, and I don't know what's going on in there. Um, there's a chance I'm gonna make up a story to explain what they're doing in there, and that I'm getting the short end of the stick.
That's fair. That's fair. So then let's make sure that we explain it as best as we can. So Freemasonry is not like the Illuminati. It's something very, very different. It's a real thing, first of all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a pretty sad reflection on our PR that when you tell some people, oh, you know what, I have an appointment tonight. My podcast is going to interview a Freemason, and somebody's like, I didn't know they existed. Like,
Yeah. No, I mean, you
that's
guys definitely need to up your marketing game. That's 100%. But I think you're doing a good job in terms of coming on the podcast. That is a interesting meta question. What is the incentive for people in these sorts of secret societies to come on podcasts and talk about them?
I mean, I'm going to be, completely upfront and transparent with you. So my incentive is twofold.
Hmm?
So let's get to one aspect of my incentive, just in the interest of openness and honesty. I'm a person who has actually written, authored and published two books. So much like anybody else who has a creative bug and wants to put something out to the world, you have the challenge of getting that information out in front of people. I'm not Stephen King. I'm not George R. R. Martin. I don't, I'm not, burning up the charts at the, New York Times bestseller list.
Not yet.
I Thank you. It's very kind. I appreciate your optimism. So I don't have some kind of marketing budget or something. I have to do the legwork to try to get the word out to people. Hey, I've created something that I feel like has a valuable message and something to say, and a piece of writing that I think people are going to enjoy and get something valuable out of. So please have a look at it. This is me trying to expose the world to what I feel like I have to share. The other goal and purpose, of course, is, in the hopes of debunking some of these myths, some of these fears and concerns that people might have, because, honestly, this is something you and I have chatted about briefly before getting to record this, specific conversation. There's a lot more about Freemasonry that you can talk about than there is that you can't. So, if I love something and I feel like it's given me a lot of positivity in my life, why shouldn't I want to share that with the rest of the world? Here I am.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, that's a great explanation. So then I guess we should just get to the meat of it. What is being a Freemason like? Like, what is it? Is it like a religion, or is it something more? Is it something less? Is it something different?
So there's an old story that I like to trot out. I don't recall who originally told this. It's one of those ancient fairy tales, right? A story of um, someone wishing to prove a point to say uh, how even one individual thing can be looked at from many perspectives. They took an elephant and presented it to five blind men, and he said to them, "You've never encountered an elephant before?" And they all agreed. And he said, "Okay, tell me what the elephant is." So somebody reached out their hand and held the trunk of the elephant and felt it move, all by itself. And he said, "Oh, an elephant is a thing like a snake." And somebody else reached out and touched the elephant's ear. And they said, "Oh, an elephant is something kind of like a palm tree, like a palm leaf." And somebody else reached out his arm and just touched the side of the elephant, the big sturdy flank of the elephant. He's like, "Oh, an elephant is a thing like a wall." And somebody else touched the leg, and they said, "Oh, and an elephant is a thing like a tree." And the last man, he grasped the tail of the elephant, a little bit more narrow, and he said, "Oh, an elephant is a thing like a rope." So Freemasonry, for better or for worse, is many different things. and it is all of them at the same time. Now, you asked a very relevant question, which is Freemasonry a religion? And the very short answer is nope. What Freemasonry is, though, is it's a very spiritual organization. It encourages all of its members to be adherents of their own religion, whatever that might be. In the United States, it does make its membership exclusive to monotheists. When you consider that, it's a pretty broad term because it means Christians of all sorts of different stripes, Muslims, Jews can all sit together in harmony in this organization. So it is not itself a religion. We will get together, say before a meal or before initiating a new member or before any, really significant event, we will say a prayer. But when we all say God together, we don't quibble over what language his name should be in or what day of the week you're supposed to pray to him. We focus on what we have in common rather than our differences. Freemasonry is also engaged in a ton of charity. We have charities that are focused on looking out for, taking care of, and supporting our own members, for sure. But we also have charitable outreach to other organizations. Different branches of Freemasonry have a tendency to pick a focus of different charities and then stick with that. So, like, there's a group called the Scottish Rite Freemasons. They support tutoring for children with dyslexia. There are York Rite Masons who donate to the Ronald McDonald House. There are Tall Cedars who help support research for, looking for a cure for muscular dystrophy. And then there's just like a huge spectrum of other smaller charities that get supported. The Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania, the governing body for my whole state, also gathers money to get both telephone calling cards as well as baby showers for members of the military and their spouses. And then many of the different, smaller local units, these subordinate lodges in one town or another, will just make separate donations to either their local Salvation Army or children's youth sports. So it's like there's a huge spectrum of charity that gets supported by Freemasonry. Freemasonry does certainly also have a social aspect. So we will do things, socially just to gather, like maybe immediately after lodge, we might all enjoy a dinner together. But then there's other broader events, groups of Freemasons will get together with other members and their families, their spouses, their children, to tailgate and go to sports events, or to go out and catch a show at the theater. So there is a fair amount of social aspect to it. There's also more of a club or business aspect to it. We hold regular scheduled meetings. We read off minutes. We'll vote on whether to, which charities to support and when. We will vote on new members. Goodness gracious, what might I be leaving out? So there's a lot of different activity that falls under this umbrella of what is Freemasonry.
In terms of the values, so I apologize for using religious references, but Christianity is love thy neighbor. In Buddhism, you can picture the Bodhi tree, you can picture this way of being. For Freemasons, what is this kind of like, caricature is the wrong word, but what is that hallmark card of being of a value of a Freemason? How would you describe it like that?
Um, I like the fact that you use the word caricature. That's not bad. You're just saying, like, stereotypically,
Sure,
how
that's
does a
fine.
Freemasonry, like, how does a Freemason, sorry, not a Freemasonry, how does a Freemason picture his own values? And I can give you a great anecdote that sums this up perfectly. Freemasons, we do, I think there's an aspect that I left out of my last answer, what falls under the broad umbrella of what Freemasonry is, because there's also a certain amount of ritual. And this ritual largely consists of memorized speeches that get recited. And most of these memorized speeches are about how we should conduct ourselves, how we should think about ourselves as part of a community, like living in a society where people should learn to look out for each other. And if you're taking baby steps, those lessons start by teaching us to take care of each other within the membership of the organization. And we should learn, at whatever pace we are capable of making that charitable feeling more expansive to look out for and take care of everybody else in the world. And if you listen to these lectures over and over, I mean, provided that you've got a fertile mind and you're receptive to these ideas, it should start to get pretty ingrained. Now, like I said, we do have some aspects of the organization that might sound a little bit more boring or more routine. One time, a bunch of us were gathered together at one particular lodge in a suburb, outside of Pittsburgh for what we call a school of instruction. A bunch of guys get together to practice ritual, just to rehearse and make sure that people get it as close to letter perfect as possible, and also to help maintain consistency between neighboring lodges to make sure that you don't have random people going off doing it one way over here, one way over there. So we're all gathered together at this one lodge building rehearsing stuff. And then the evening's over, we have a bite to eat together, and it's time to leave. And we come outside and we realize it's been snowing. And there's, it's a property with a decent sized lawn surrounding it and a good size asphalt paved parking lot. And we're all parked out there. But now it's been snowing so hard, you can't distinguish between where the level of the asphalt was and where the grass starts. And sure enough, one of the guys comes back into the building and says, I was trying to pull out of the parking lot and now my wheels are in the grass and they're spinning and I think I'm stuck. And I can't tell you how funny it was to see this mob of guys get up and race for the door and like running up the stairs to go help this one guy. So many people wanted to help. I was there, and like not everybody could get their hands on the car because so many people wanted to help push. To me, that is the stereotype of what Freemasonry is, can be, and should be about.
Yeah, those values of brotherhood, of friendship, of helping out your fellow human. And it's interesting how, you were saying that it's not a religion, but it encompasses a lot of religions, monotheistic religions. And so it's kind of like a layer on top, or some bridge between religions. It doesn't matter. There's like religious neutrality in that way.
Yes.
That's a beautiful thing about that, which should be explored even outside of Freemasonry, is how does Freemasonry even adopt that and enforce that? That's fascinating.
Hey, you won't get any argument here. How is it enforced? On some level, we rely a lot on the conscience of an individual human being to say, but there is a mechanism of this whole thing, right? For better or for worse, if you are interested enough that you choose to join, unless you encounter somebody, maybe like myself, who's pretty open and comfortable with communication and capable of conveying to you what it is you're getting yourself into, you may not have an in-depth idea before you join. But as you're in the process of getting initiated, it's going to be spelled out for you pretty thoroughly and clearly. And much like other things a person can undertake or join in the world, like, look, if you go to court and you appear there as a witness, you're going to be sworn in. You're going to take an oath. If you're going to go join the armed forces or become a police officer, you're going to take an oath. If you're getting married, you're going to make some vows, right? This is an oath. So you're standing up in front of your community and in front of God, and you're making a promise. So there's this mechanism that's at play, right? If you don't value that oath, if you listen to those words and they don't mean something to you, it's kind of hard for anybody else to enforce that promise upon you, right? But if you have a conscience and you care about what you say and how it jives with what you do, then once you take that oath, it's binding on you. It means something. So if I've said, I'm going to look at these men around me and treat them as brothers and like, and that means something to me. The fact that I have made a promise, then I'm going to keep it.
There's an interesting thing that you said a while back is spiritual. What spiritual insights have you had while being a Freemason?
Well, for one thing, I'm going to say that an interesting aspect of joining the organization is that it gave me a renewed. So this may jumble together religion and spirituality, but it gave me a renewed appreciation for my own roots. Um, it made me take a look back and say, where have I come from, and what is that trajectory to help me understand where I'm going. Um, but also, one of the things that you wrestle with, if you are, whether you consider yourself, spiritual or religious, if you believe in higher power, you might occasionally find yourself confronting the question, what does the higher power want from me? What do you want from me? And Freemasonry does not propose to take the place of any religion, but it does offer an answer to this question, which is God wants us to care about each other and look out for one another. And even if I'm not going to say that this message is this next message is explicit, I feel like we get a certain amount of messaging from modern society to mind our own business. Keep your nose out of other people's affairs. You walk down the street, you see somebody crying, try not to make eye contact. This is not my problem. But imagine, if you will, that you belonged to an organization that repeatedly and strongly enjoined and encouraged you to invest your thoughts and feelings in what's happening to the people around you, and if you possibly can, do something for humanity. How bad could that be?
It's not bad at all. So then, I mean, there are two questions I want to ask. I don't know which one I should ask first, so I guess I'll just go with this one. But how is Freemasonry such a benevolent organization with such bad PR? How does that even happen?
There's I'm not going to I'm not going to say that I think I have a universal answer to that question, but I know at least one, right? Which is that there is an air of secrecy that has been cultivated to some extent on purpose. There are, it's an organization that has secrets. But as a result of that, like I had, said before, people have this tendency to fill in the blanks, and unfortunately, have imputed a lot of sinister motives to this organization. And
Imputed is a great word, by the way. Sorry to interrupt. It's a
well, thanks.
fantastic word to use.
Thank you very much. Now, you could waste an awful lot of time and energy arguing with people who are spouting fiction, or you might decline to engage with them. And I can respect the strategy of declining to engage with them. Unfortunately, it then allows these falsehoods and misinformation to proliferate.
Sure, sure. And I guess we should just talk about the elephant in the room in terms of secrecy, because Freemasonry is a secret society. What is that in terms of being a secret society? What are the benefits and maybe the detriments of that?
So I'm going to tell you that, in my opinion, secret society is a bit of a misnomer. Because if it was a genuinely secret society, you wouldn't see dudes driving around with decals on their bumper, a square and compass that says, "Hey, look at me, I'm a Freemason." You surely wouldn't drive past buildings with a big sign on the side of the building that's got the square and compass that says, "Look at us, this is where the Freemasons meet." That's not a very secret society, but it is a society with secrets. Now, what are the components that are actually secret? I'm going to explain. And in order to explain, I need to rewind history a little bit and take you back to the beginning and the origins of the organization.
Sure.
Fundamentally, it started out as something kind of like a union. It was, a trade guild, right? Where people actually learned to work in stone, in masonry. You're building cathedrals and universities and castles out of stone, right? You were teaching somebody a valuable life skill where they were going to be able to earn a living, and they might be interested if the work that was being offered to them was not here in their hometown, but someplace a little farther afield. They might want to travel over there and take a job on this other job site. But they're going to show up there to someone who is, the foreman or whoever is managing this construction project over in this other vicinity, and they're going to present themselves and say, "Hi, I am a trained Mason." That person over there is going to say is now in a bit of a quandary, right? This person is claiming to have skills that mean that they're going to be able to build a building and it's going to be safe and not fall down. That's just plain and simple, right? How do I know that they are authentically who they say they are, implying that they've had the training that they're claiming that they've had? Well, if in addition to the actual skills of building, the people at the location where this guy originated taught him something else that they only teach their members, that they are forbidden to tell anybody else, and then this guy is able to travel over to somewhere else where they have a similar training and demonstrate that he knows that secret, that's shorthand to prove that he also knows the other instruction that he received in his place of origin. The modes of recognition, the things that we do in order to distinguish ourselves and prove that we are members and we are who we say we are genuinely the only things that are required to be kept secret within Freemasonry. The modes of recognition, ritual that happens in lodge when we are in closed session, those are the only things that we are required not to talk about. I mean, if I can fill up an hour chatting with you, it seems as though there's a lot more that's allowed to be discussed than there is that is not.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right on that front. And it just makes me wonder, how easy is it to become a Freemason? And can anyone become one? Like, could I find a Freemason, lodge in Montreal where I'm at right now and just join? Or are there certain requirements that a person needs to have?
I do not wish to be too ambiguous here, but I think the answer is it's kind of easy and kind of hard. The fact of the matter is, many people should be qualified. So the requirements in most jurisdictions, in most of the different regions where this is, organized into governing bodies, are pretty few. We talked about this whole monotheism thing, right? You have to believe in some higher power. You are usually not required to define to anybody what that is, but you are expected to believe in a God of some kind. You should be of good character, right? A good person, an upright person. That should not be much more complicated than me telling you that linguistic description. If you're like, well, how good do I have to be? Or like, well, what does a good person really mean? Then there's a chance that maybe you're not it. But monotheist, of good character, male. In most of ordinary recognized Freemasonry around the world right now, it is required to be male. It is a fraternity. There are parallel and separate branches of Freemasonry, and I should be more careful of the language that I use, that are, some avenues of which are every bit as authentic as our own, but we don't commingle. They are considered their own separate strain, and perhaps sometime, if you're interested in a longer digression on this, we could talk about that. And then in most jurisdictions also, you need to be above some age, but that varies. In some places that's 18, other places it's 21. Yes, it is not hard to find other Freemasons. If you don't know the location of a lodge near you, or don't already have somebody in your social circle who is a Freemason, in a lot of places around the world, you can go onto the internet and find the website of a Grand Lodge. Like I said, these are these larger overarching governing bodies, and many of them will have, like some other organizations, a contact me page. Now, filling out the contact me page is not going to make you a member instantaneously. It's only going to initiate a process whereby the folks at that Grand Lodge are going to try to connect you with a local lodge that is somewhere near where you live. Um, and then you will be visited by members of that individual lodge, and they will, begin a discussion with you whereby they will determine whether it makes any sense for you to apply in the first place, and things will continue from there. It is almost never a rapid process, but it's not an impossible process either.
Sure. And one of the things about, let's say, Christianity is that I could go to a place, a church, build community, find people that share my same belief system, etc. But and the expectation is that I follow those values and teachings, as closely as possible. Are there expectations of being a Freemason? It seems like you get so much, but you're not expected to give anything in return, if you know what I'm saying. Like, go ahead.
You raised an interesting question, but there is another old maxim that I hear usually relayed to brand new members every time we bring someone in, which is you're going to get out of it what you put into it. So I wouldn't say that nothing is expected of you, but your individual lodge is probably going to hold 2 meetings a month. You might attend one or both of those. You might attend none of them and continue sending in your dues money year after year, and you would still be on the ledger somewhere as a member in good standing. And by that sense, it might imply that Freemasonry does not expect a lot out of you. On the other hand, if that's the full extent of your experience, you're not going to get very much from the organization either.
It's not a passive thing, it's a very active thing.
It is, and it should be. Nobody is going to drag you kicking and screaming to do more stuff.
Sure.
But the more you do, the more you're going to get out of it, and the more you're probably going to love it.
And I don't know if this is putting any pressure on you in terms of exposing the secrets or not, but when you say more you do, what do you mean?
Oh, that's not too secret either. So as a member, right, your lodge, like I said, is likely to hold 2 meetings a month. The first meeting, usually whichever one falls earlier in the month, we refer to as a stated meeting. That's a meeting where you show up and the lodge is going to conduct business. The agenda for that evening, pretty routine. You're going to read off, and some of it is going to sound like a meeting of any other club. You're going to read off minutes from your previous session to determine and approve whether everybody agrees, on the record of what took place. You're going to pay some bills. You're going to vote on charities to donate to. There might be a lodge program that's educational to keep people stimulated and enjoy themselves. There may also be a meal either before it or after it. So nothing too exotic there, right? Then there is a second meeting of the month, only if the lodge is in the process of initiating new members. And at that meeting, ritual is going to be performed for one of the 3 stages or 3 degrees that every new member goes through in order to become a Freemason. Now, these events don't just happen out of nowhere by themselves. Hopefully, if your membership is active enough, there's going to be a handful of guys sitting on the sidelines, but there's also a dozen guys with titles as officers of that lodge. And each of those roles comes with specific responsibilities of what they're supposed to do, what they're supposed to take care of, either in advance or on the evening of, to help this organization function. Some of these positions, a person will tend to stay in that position year after year. Other parts of this functioning cast of characters, if you will, may be part of what we refer to as a progressive line, where you did this job this year, but if you do it well, you will be, what's the correct word that I'm searching for here? You would be eligible to fulfill a different role next year with escalating responsibilities until you might be in charge of that lodge for 1 year coming up somewhere, in the future. There's a lot of other roles that you can play aside from being an officer. You might be the person who helps cook for this lodge. You might be a person who helps teach ritual to other people. You might be a speaker who travels to different lodges presenting educational programs to help improve people's understanding and knowledge of their own organization and keep them interested in what's going on. There's a lot of different parts you can play. So the fact of the matter is, if you take on those parts, it's also going to increase your time commitment. And it's important that you be okay with that if you're going to go that route. It's important that your spouse be okay with that if you're going to go that route. You are never expected to put these commitments ahead of your family. That is contrary to our teachings. But if you take that position, you have also made a promise to fulfill those duties to the best of your ability. But that's part of my point, is that if you choose to go that route, the more of yourself you put into it, the more you're going to get back. The more engaged you feel in your organization, the more it feels like it belongs to you. That's been a really positive experience for me.
And that's why you wrote these 2 books?
Yep.
So I don't want to ask the stupid question of why you wrote these books, but what do you intend to do with these books, in the sense of why are you writing them in such a public format? You're not writing them to Freemasons, you're writing them to the general public.
For me, these books have an intended dual audience. I think that it's easiest to tell what's going on from the first book because it's actually a collection of writings that I originally composed for a magazine that is put out by the Scottish Rite in Pittsburgh. The Scottish Rite is just, for us, is just an optional branch. That's something additional that people can join if they choose after they are full members in a regular lodge. Because the Scottish Rite, which is organized in a valley, because a Scottish Rite valley usually draws its membership from a lot of lodges in a geographical area surrounding it, that tends to be a body with a somewhat larger membership. And this particular Scottish Rite Valley in Pittsburgh has a magazine. Now, the Scottish Rite Valley has a cast of officers in much the same way as an individual lodge has a cast of officers. I became active there and ascended through a line of escalating responsibilities until I was in charge of one of the bodies within the Scottish Rite. And in our valley in Pittsburgh, there is a requirement of the officers who arrive at that presiding position that they write content for our magazine. And in fulfilling that assignment, I kind of rediscovered a love that I had forgotten, a love of writing. And I was fortunate that I got some really positive and encouraging feedback, both from the members of the Valley of Pittsburgh, as well as the editorial staff at the magazine, who asked me to stay on and continue writing for them, even after my tenure in this presiding position was over. So I continued writing for the magazine. I continued getting positive feedback from the readership of this magazine, and I started to wonder whether there might be some merit in collecting some of my writing and putting it out as a book. And I was hesitant, I was concerned, I was uncertain, and I decided to take the leap. So in 2022, I put out a book. It's called More Light: Collected Masonic Writings from 2017 to 2021. So I would never put something into writing that we're not permitted to discuss. So although I would say that the way these articles are written are mostly targeted at an audience of Masons who already have some familiarity with the organization, the content is also understandable and digestible to an audience of the general public. And really, I actually feel like there's especially like maybe 4 articles in that collection that kind of help spell out what some of the fundamental tenets of the organization are. And it dawned on me that that's really probably a good entree, a good segue into understanding the organization, even for a member of the general public who has had no prior exposure. So after having written that book, like I had mentioned to you, because there's nobody else taking responsibility for helping me try to get my message out in front of folks. That's that responsibility kind of falls to me. I wound up traveling around Pennsylvania, as well as occasional appearances outside the state, New York, Ohio, West Virginia, um, presenting both compositions that came from this collection, as well as periodically writing brand new material just for presentation at those individual bodies. And over the course of the succeeding 2 years, had written enough new original material that I thought it would be worth collecting and releasing as a new book. So that came out just summer of last year, which is entitled Black Ink, Farther Stars. Um, so that's kind of what the genesis of both of those books is. And I do feel like, to some extent, it's geared toward a Masonic audience, but I also feel as though I've captured it in language that is palatable for a broader audience.
Sure. And you're doing a fantastic job with that. I just have to extend the compliment. Are
Thank
there
you.
any kind of underexplored or urgent topics within Freemasonry that you'd like to talk about that don't get enough attention or
You know what? This topic is not exclusive to Freemasonry, but it's a dovetail between Freemasonry and something that is urgently needed in contemporary society, which is just basic civility.
Hmm,
Um, the idea that you don't have to agree with another person on every aspect of your point of view, but can still respect them as a fellow human being, respect their being entitled to their positions and their opinions, maybe strive to find some common ground, but where you can't, um, just giving somebody the dignity of respect as a fellow person, fellow human being, um, is not something that's taught exclusively by Freemasonry, but is something that is taught emphatically by Freemasonry, and we could surely use more of it in the general public today.
absolutely, absolutely agree with you. And it does raise a couple of questions. The first being, it would really suck, especially in this day and age, and I do want to ask you how Freemasons deal with the digital world, but it would really suck if being a Freemason or even being like a pseudo Freemason became a trend. Do you ever foresee that to happen where influencers start, like an influencer finds their way into a lodge and starts talking about Freemasonry and in inappropriate ways and, brings all of this attention and digital hate and all of that to the group?
It's a complicated question. Um, would it suck? It could suck if certain things went wrong, right? So the question, when we make up our hypothetical influencer, the question is this person a fundamentally decent human being? Because if by all other measures and standards they belong in Freemasonry, they don't divulge anything that is supposed to be kept secret, and all they are doing is essentially helping raise the profile of the organization, might not be a terrible thing.
Sure.
When you ask about the current digital environment, Freemasonry is wrestling with it. I'm not going to say struggling. That might be unkind. But demographically, the organization tends to skew a little bit older. And so some of the younger membership coming in are trying to help usher Freemasonry into the digital age with some successes and some failures. Um, One of the challenges of social media and other new media is that because you've democratized the very act of publishing content, um, valuable and accurate information is not necessarily expanding any faster than misinformation, garbage, and gobbledygook, right? Um, so I know a fella based out of Texas who was very active on TikTok talking about Freemasonry, but in a very similar spirit to the conversation that you and I are having. He wasn't divulging anything inaccurate, and he wasn't divulging anything inappropriate to be shared. So, if anything, it was really helping raise the profile of the organization in a very positive way. Now, I know he experienced some discouragement from this because as his profile also rose, he became the target of a lot of nonsense. And I feel badly for him that that happened. Um, so, new media and social media, it's a blessing and a curse. And I think that Freemasonry as a whole, and in its many different little individual parts, is still doing its best to navigate how to rise to that challenge and make the best use of these new tools. Um, if the organization ever became trendy,
Mhm.
then what you're discussing is definitely a danger, right? Um, but the finding a way to define what that issue is and whether there are aspects of it that could do our organization some good is a whole flip side. It's another side of the coin of that question.
Speaking back, or looking back on when we're talking about civility, that is something that I feel like America as a nation, I feel not just to pinpoint America, I feel like the entire world is struggling with that, whether it's in the world of atoms or world of bits. How does a Freemason tackle that? How do you have the emotional intelligence in order to be civil and to engage in healthy discourse?
I am going to start. Oh, bless you. I'm
Sorry.
going to start by saying I cannot sit here and pat myself on the back too long, and none of us are perfect, right?
Sure.
So, you could tie this into other spiritual practices of mindfulness. The fact of the matter is, right? Because it's one thing to stand in a lodge, memorize lectures about civility, and be able to then recite them back word for word. It's another thing when I'm in the car and I'm on my way to work and I'm already running late, and then a guy cuts me off.
Sure.
So this is truly where the rubber hits the road. And the question is, do I have adequate mindfulness
Mhm.
to be prepared for situations of pressure, to remember that these lessons are still relevant in the moment, and to have that be my reflex instead of anger being my reflex?
Right.
Um, Now, I'm going to tell you a little anecdote, and it's not a perfect solution to this problem, but I'm going to tell you there's a funny debate that rages within Freemasonry year after year. And anytime somebody brings it up, it's kind of like they threw gasoline on the fire and the debate picks up again. You ready for the debate? I've got a ring with a square and compass on it. A ring can go on either way. Now
Mhm.
it's facing upside down. Now it's facing right side up. Which way is the correct way to wear the ring? And then you pose this on an internet forum and everybody goes bananas. But there's an answer that people have a tendency to trot out. And some people will say, I want to wear my ring facing towards me, right? Instead of this way, so that if I was handing you something over a counter, you would see it. I want to wear mine. I'm sorry, this is such a poor description for your listeners who might just be on audio instead of video. I'm going to wear it this way with the symbol facing towards me. The symbol is facing towards me as a reminder of the lessons that are supposed to be symbolized by these working tools and the promises that I've made about how I will behave towards my fellow man, and that this is supposed to be a brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of God.
Mm.
So if you have enough reminders, either in your physical surroundings or in your mental and emotional ecosystem, then in those instances where the rubber hits the road, where somebody within earshot says, oh, I support this political candidate, not this one, or somebody cuts you off in traffic, or somebody bumps into you and knocks over your coffee or your beer. In that moment, do you have the mindfulness to remember your lessons, remember what you promised, and that you're in the process, you're a work in process, working on yourself to be a better man?
Mhm.
That's where the rubber hits the road.
That's a fantastic description. What advice do you have for people that maybe are interested in Freemasonry but don't know where to start? And Maybe before you answer that, it does seem like a lot of people can take the values and teachings of Freemasonry and being a Freemason without being a Freemason. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, so I am a Jewish person. And one thing that it took me a little while to learn as a young adult, and then I came to a better grasp of as I matured, is that uh, like I have my in group, but Jewish persons are not the only good persons, and not all bad persons are non-Jewish persons. Like none of these things are exclusive to each other, right? Um, Only good people are qualified to join the Freemasons, but uh, Freemasons aren't the only good people on earth. And you don't have to join the Freemasons to be a spiritual seeker, to work on your self improvement, to think about your attitude and your obligations to society at large. You don't have to be a Freemason. Um, but this organization has existed for hundreds of years because something about these principles, this symbolism, and this antiquity resonates with people. And I'm grateful that it still continues as history continues to march on. That something about this organization still continues to resonate with people and somehow reaches out and touches people in the brains. And people see it. They see it somewhere and they go, I need to know more about this. Sometimes it's kids who grow up and their dad, their uncles are members. And they might not necessarily see behind the curtain, but they see that their dad gets together with these guys and they're good people. They're decent, upstanding people. And they're all part of that circle and they care about each other and they look out for each other. And then that kid finally gets old enough and says, Dad, I want to be a member. And other people, the story plays out a little different, like me.
If you had a magic wand and you could solve one problem in the world, what would it be and why?
Whoa. You know what? It's going to sound like I'm off track, but I'm going to tell you something. The first thing that pops into my head is solving world hunger.
Hmm?
Um, are you into psychology?
A little bit.
Okay. You ever been exposed to Maslow's hierarchy of needs? It's like
Yes, sir.
that diagram in the pyramid. So look, I can have all these lofty ideas about philosophically how I should be behaving or how other people should be behaving, or I can have lofty theological musings, but it's hard for anybody to pay any attention to that. When you're starving and your physical needs aren't being met. So at the risk of sounding like I've veered 90 degrees someplace else, that would be the first thing that I'd be concerned about. This organization will endure. So I wouldn't be going and waving a magic wand and saying, fix problems that worry me about this. I would say, world hunger, and then we'll look into the other issues.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as a last question, what gives you hope in the world?
Watching young people pick up the torch of these efforts, things like civility, things like human decency and human dignity, without somebody else nudging them and saying, you know what you should be doing is working for these causes. Young people who are just inspired and step up and carry out these missions, that gives me hope for the future.
Fantastic. Well, Austin, I think we're going to wrap up there. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for being here. Where can we find you online? Where can we find your books? Where can we follow you?
Ooh, okay. So the place that I tend to be most active online is on Facebook. I have two separate profiles there. One is me as an individual, and then one is my author page. So if you look for Austin R. Shifrin, author, you will find daily musings that I put out about Masonic concepts and other constructs, in philosophy, civics, and ethics that relate back to Freemasonry, as well as me talking about places where I'll be doing public appearances and speaking, to groups. So that's the best place to keep track of me. But I do also have content on Instagram. Um, to find my books, I am at Amazon. Um, the first book is also available on Barnes and Noble and a few other outlets, but both of the books are available at Amazon. Perhaps you would be able to add a link to your show content,
Absolutely.
so we could do that. Um, and I'm not sure if I missed any component of the question, but those are the two best places to track me down.
100%. And all your links will be in the show notes. We'll make sure that we stay up to date with you, and hopefully you come back and talk more about those strains that we didn't discuss. But this was a great conversation. Austin, thank you so much.
It has been terrific. Thank you so much for having me. Please be well and take care, and I look forward to talking to you again sometime.